If you haven't had a chance yet, make sure you check out our first talk with Patrick Uikс, one of the major writers here on BioWare, Dragon Age, Mass Effect, and he really gave us a how-to of getting involved in the gaming industry as a writer. You got to check it out if you're even remotely interested. But today, we're talking about his work, starting with Mass Effect, going into Dragon Age. We will not leave a single stone unturned. Who are these characters to you? We start with Tali. What is this character to you? You've had a lot of time to mold her. How would you describe her?
Oh, I love her.
Okay.
She is an engineering geek. She is the girl who will debate operating systems and video cards, and she loves all of that stuff. She's the kid who wanted to go out and explore the world in the first game, and in the second game, in Mass Effect 2, found out what terrible things are out there and made the decision to stay and fight, to help rather than go back to her fleet. And on one hand, she's noble, she's brave, she's smart, she's tough, and also, just as importantly, because of the society in which she grew up, a society that had, come out on the losing end of a war with the Geth, the synthetic creations that kicked the Quarians off their own homeworld, Tali grew up with huge racist blind spots. Mm-hmm. And that's equally important to her character. I think it's really tempting to create characters with no flaws, and I think Tali is as important for her flaws as for all of her intelligence and her drive and her courage. And, a lot of the conclusion on Rannoch, you are resolving the Geth, the battle between the Geth and the Quarians, which, comes back to a head in Mass Effect 3, and that really comes down to, have you given the Geth a reason to trust the Quarians, and have you given the Quarians, and in both cases, they're represented by people, have you given Tali a reason to trust the Geth? I would call it a dirty trick, but I'm not even sure it's dirty at this point. It's a good, slightly underhanded trick, but it's really difficult to tell a story and get somebody to care about an entire species. Mm-hmm. But what I can do, what I have in my toolbox is after 10 years, I'm pretty good at getting someone to care about a person. So, when they said, "Hey, Patrick, you're going to be writing the conclusion of the Geth and the Quarians," that was so big. I'm looking at that going, okay, I know there are going to be space battles because space battles are awesome, but how do I resolve that? And what I eventually got to, talking with the other writers, talking with the cinematics people, is this can't be like, we'll have the ships and we'll have the fight in space, but to make people care, to get people emotionally engaged, that's why Tali has to be there, and that's why Legion on the Geth side has to be there. I can get people to care about this fight or this reconciliation between these two people.
Before we get to that, really, I think the most impactful moment for me in Mass Effect 3, I want to talk a little bit about the transition you had in Tali in her reactions to Shepard. You said earlier, that she had essentially a blind spot. There is a lot of that indentured racism in her. Mm-hmm. How are you able to convey that in a way that you still have a character that is really lovable, so lovable that from the first game to the last two, players demanded that they have the option to literally be with her? So how do you take that transition and still have these flaws that are realistic, but not so much that they're kind of unpalatable?
Well, it's interesting because I think, and I think this is probably true for Mordin as well. When you write a character with flaws and you write that character honestly, you start learning interesting things about yourself. In order to capture Tali's racism, because obviously in any writing pass we go through different drafts. And in some of the early drafts, I would have Tali going, the Geth are just awful. The Geth are, and it was like, well, no, okay, that's making her, first off, that makes her sound like a monster. That's not somebody I want on my team. That's not the Quarian, young woman that I want to write. And what struck me is that real racism isn't really about other people. Real racism is about yourself. Real racism for Tali is not about the Geth are these awful things and I have to destroy them. Real racism is Tali saying, we lost our homeworld, we need to get it back. I can't eat normal food because I don't have a working immune system anymore, and if my helmet comes off, I might get sick and die. Those are all valid from her viewpoint, and she's never, at least in the first game, and going into the second, she's never been confronted with, okay, all of that is true, but the reason that happened is because your people tried to destroy the Geth, and refused to make peace, and have passed up future chances for peace. And so all of these things, it's not that what you're experiencing is invalid, it's that you are making assumptions because of what you're experiencing that say, because we don't have a home world and I have to live in these suits, it is fair that we orbitally bombard the Geth and destroy them to take our home world back. It's the part where you don't even, where the consequences are just, for the Geth, are just this little footnote, because the racism is the blind spot that lets you make people into a footnote.
Fascinating. So from that point of creating these characters that do have these real complex issues, going into Mass Effect 3, when was there a moment that you believe Tali sort of changed? Because like you said, she's represented in one way of having these very real racist thoughts that just have to do with her reality. When did that change for her? And is it always, because obviously there's player choice in how you interact, is there some builds of Tali where that never changes?
Yeah, there definitely are. For Tali, one of the things that we loved working on the entire Mass Effect trilogy is the chance to have characters exist over a long time and change and grow. And for us, it was Tali and Legion. And Legion, you always encountered him in the game, but you never had to turn him on. It was the Geth. You find him in one mission, but it's a choice. Do I want to sell him to Cerberus? Do I want to leave him in my security room but never turn him on? Or do I want to activate Legion and let him become a member of my squad and learn something about the Geth? And the choice of whether you engage with Legion is what forces Tali to get out of her own helmet a little bit. If Legion is there, being a person, sharing its perspective, saying, yes, it's really sad that happened to you. Also, we were just trying to say hello and you blew us up. That's what forces Tali to grow. It's the exposure to other cultures, the exposure to other people. And in a game in which you don't engage Legion, in a game in which you don't do Legion's plot, then Tali and Legion never argue. There's this one scene where Tali is pulling a gun on Legion in Mass Effect 2, and how you react to that has huge consequences for Mass Effect 3. If you actually talk Tali down and get Tali to say, okay, I'll back off, and then Legion kind of concedes as well and says, here, Tali, I'll do this, and Tali sees, like, wow, he's making concessions too. This is fascinating. Then in Mass Effect 3, she is so much more willing to see the Geth point of view. And, her people still go to war, but now it's a war she doesn't believe in and thinks is tragic and just wants to get her people out of alive instead of, I want to destroy the Geth.
For you, which of those Talis is the one, and I guess this is representative of any of the characters you write in BioWare, is there one that you believe is the real representation of what you want this character to be?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And this doesn't invalidate the others, because just because I wrote them doesn't mean that I'm right, but I think Tali needs to grow. I believe, rightly or wrongly, that knowledge is better than ignorance. I think knowledge is more complicated, and it leads to trickier decisions, and it leads to a lot more thoughtful pauses when you're trying to figure out what to say. But ultimately, I have to believe that knowledge, experience, more understanding leads to the world being a better place. And because of that, I believe that Tali being exposed to the new ideas and, coming away from it more interested in more interested in understanding the Geth, more interested in finding a peaceful solution. For me, that is who I hope she becomes.
Speaking
that's
to
Tally for me.
speaking to that solution, it can be one of the most beautiful ones. We've said it before in Mass Effect 3 in the game between the Quarians and the Geth. What were some of the proposed ideas for ending this 3-game long conflict?
Oh, we had so many. We always knew there was going to be a battle in space because you have the Quarians with the largest fleet ever, and then you have the Geth, who are awesome robots with cool ships. So we knew something like that was going to happen. We talked about them getting along. We talked about the Reapers taking over the Geth. We talked about the Quarians making deals with the Reapers. We were always trying to figure out what is the most interesting tragedy that can get them to fight, because they weren't really fighting, and there was no, we needed something that would get them to go from, the Quarians wandering in exile to deciding to declare war in the middle of the Reaper invasion. And with that, we had to figure out, what is the saddest, most understandably human thing that could get them to go to war, and what's the saddest, most understandably human thing that could get the Geth to fight back. And that's kind of how we ended up where we were.
In those different options that you had of, how it could end, what for you is the most authentic ending for the story that you wrote, these characters that you believe are, the most authentic?
It's funny because I want to say that with the same optimism, making Tali understand and getting peace is the most authentic, but I felt really good when I wrote that, and I'm really happy that that option exists, but at the same time, I think that's probably too easy.
Mm-hmm.
And, it hurts to say it. It in no way makes me happy to say it, but when I wrote this, the goal I had in mind was the goal we all had in mind, because I always talk about this like I wrote this, but in reality there were cinematic designers responsible for every shot, level designers responsible for making the right feel. So I is just the shorthand for a team of people. But we wanted to ask the question of making a decision that people could disagree with, and neither side is wrong. Because the Quarians are clearly more sympathetic. They have, more understandable voices.
Mm-hmm.
They have a sad backstory. They have emotionally understandable needs. The Geth are objectively the defenders. They are the ones who defended themselves when the Quarians tried to wipe them out. They didn't seek the war then. They didn't seek the war now. They're objectively in the right on this. Mm-hmm. And getting the player to make a choice between the person who is objectively correct and the person who is sympathetically correct was a fascinating one for us. So if we say, what's more sympathetic, I love seeing the Quarians get their homeworld back. For me, the correct answer is that the Geth continue. And if you can't get peace, it's siding with the Geth and having the Quarians destroyed because of their own tragic inability to empathize. The Quarians destroyed because of their tragic inability to empathize with the Geth, their own creations.
Sorry, I needed a moment to let that settle there.
I got a little, it's just,
mm-hmm.
It's who's right versus who's kind, who's
mm-hmm.
nice. And, yeah.
How many players do you think actually allowed that option to happen, though?
It's funny. It's more than we thought.
Really?
One of the things I was really happy with in Mass Effect 3 is that when we had a lot of, one or the other type choices, we moved away from saying this one is obviously Paragon and this one is obviously Renegade. We never really meant for Paragon or Renegade to be good guy versus bad guy, but rightly or wrongly, whatever we intended, people really felt like Paragon was good guy and Renegade was bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so we moved away from calling, hey, the renegade option is destroy the Geth, the paragon option is save the Geth, and just moved it to two neutral choices to let the player make their own, moral decision about which one was the right one. And, there are a lot of people who their last vision of Tali is watching her walk off that cliff.
Amazing. So that's definitely not my last vision of Tali, I'll tell you that one. But well, that for you too, you think of these characters that you spend so much time creating, and this is one very real path that this character could have taken. We talked before about authenticity. You created a world where this is very likely going to happen. In this world, in this authentic character line, everyone's searching for canon. Do you see Tali, being a romance interest of Shepard, going the Garrus route? It's just fascinating to see from one of the minds behind it where they believed this character's motivations would be.
Well, it's fascinating because one of the most difficult parts of writing these characters is finding a way to make, like you said, there are so many different versions. There's tragic Tali who goes off the cliff. There's grim Tali who, if you can't get peace, she has this boot knife, and she's had the boot knife for all three games. And it was always just this little art piece. It's on one of her boots, and it's just this little thing jutting out the back where a soldier would keep a combat knife. And one of our goals was, okay, if it's Tali and Legion there, if you side with Tali, she uses the boot knife. It was like this 3 games of payoff, actually, watching her run around with that thing, and she finally gets to use it. So there's a version where she dies. There's a version where she uses the boot knife. There's a version where she's sad and mourning Legion because you got peace, but Legion died anyway. There's the romance version. There's the non-romance, but she's now starting to date Garrus at the very end of Mass Effect 3.
Oh.
We were just,
I came to say goodbye, and, well...
And it's finding a way to make to keep all these in your head and to make them all equally valid. And it's fascinating, and sometimes you trip over yourself. There are times when, I've done it with Tali and Mordin and Solus and everyone. There are times when you have the other writers to go, hey, it's great that you wrote that line, but not everyone is romancing Tali, so you probably need another one instead.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, oh, that's right, yeah, okay. That one only works if you're romancing her. If you, if she's your buddy, or if, there are even, the toughest one is for characters who don't really, or for players who don't really care about the character. Because at the end of the day, you're making entertainment. You're making something for someone to engage in or not, and you kind of have to make a deal with the player that says, okay, look, if you click to invite Tali up to your room, she looks at the fish. She has that nice moment. That's an optional thing. So if you click on that, I am allowed as the writer to assume that you care about her because you've made the decision to click. If you didn't care about her, you wouldn't click. So I'm never going to write a version where you invite Tali up to the room and you look at the fish and you go, Tali, I don't really like you. I don't care about you. I think you're dumb. Because...
What?
Yeah, because the player who feels that way never clicks to invite her up. So on the flip side, Tali is required as a party member on the final Rannoch mission. She has to come along. And so there are players who... as much as I disagree with them, they don't really care about Tali. They're not, she's not their favorite character, but she's required on this mission. So for that, I have to kind of put in the branches. I have to put in places where if the player wants to, they can dig a little deeper, they can have an additional conversation. But if they don't, they can just be like, smooth sailing. Yep, we're team members getting this job done, and this works whether Tali is my best friend or my romance or just another member of the team.
Amazing. So from that ending line where you have all these different options, you have all these different Talis, and like you said there, when do you get lost? How? Because this is maybe an overarching question for all of these characters you write, but specific to Tali that can be so many different things. Where does consistency come in, and how important is it?
It's funny. The good news is that as long as you have the core of the voice right, Tali is never going to not care about technology. She's never, she's always going to be the tech geek. She's always going to be brave. She's always going to be a little more emotional, just because she's a little bit younger than Shepard is. As long as you write to that, and you have the voice actress, the fantastic Ash Soroka, who was Tali. As long as you hit that, and you have the voice, players will actually infer a lot of reactivity that, in many cases, it's, you're getting the same line, whether that's a romance or whether that's not. They'll say, oh, that was totally her talking to me because she loved me. And, no, that line was just there for anyone. But that's part of human communication. When you get the player's trust and when you get the player emotionally engaged, that's when the player is willing to do the work to understand the line or to infer the proper context. It's one of the best and worst parts about modern gaming is being able to look at Twitch streams and YouTubes and YouTubes. That's great. Now I sound like my dad. That's awesome. It's great because I get to see bits of games I will never play. It's a bummer because I look at something and go, oh, that's a goofy scene. Of course, now they're having sex. That's really dumb. How cliched. And of course I feel that way because I haven't had 15 to 20 hours of getting to know that character in the game. I haven't had the context that the person, who uploaded the YouTube clip has. And building that context is the only way we can really build a relationship. And that's what gets people to trust, to overcome their suspension of disbelief, to forget that, Tali is a bunch of pixels without even a face, that you're just looking at a helmet with a little glowy thing instead of lips, and actually start to care about this person.
Speaking of context and kind of developing it, for me, I remember very specifically trying to find every scene I could of Tali drunk and talking to the different squad mates, and trying to discover that story. And I remember thinking at the time, is this special to me? Is this special because I made these choices in that sort of way? How important is it that you create these instances for characters that seem special for a player that's made this kind of pyramid of choices to make this Tali my Tali?
Well, I think what you do, what I do, is just what you said. You remember Tali getting drunk. And because I loved writing it. Ash Soroka did an amazing job on the delivery, and then we made sure that in the Citadel DLC, when everyone throws a party, we made sure she gets drunk again because it was hilarious. And the key is putting in, for every character, you give them a few moments that everyone who plays them can go. Not everyone. Sorry, it's the wrong way to say it. That everyone who cares, that everyone for whom that is their favorite character, or that is the character that, Garrus is my absolute bro, Rex is like my brother from Tuchanka, Mordin is my intellectual friend and this scientist I help, if you care about that character, you can hit one moment and feel like that one was for you. And, there are a lot of those little moments, when we do a few for each character, and, you can hide them behind, this is only if, the player has gotten to a friendly space, this is only if the player made this choice that, it's only if you're romancing Tali, it's only if you got peace between the Geth and the Quarians that you get this one, particular scene with Tali. And that level of exclusivity, that level of here, there's just a little bit of unique content that you got because of limited choices, it makes you feel special. It's the thing that, the thing only I got to see that, not everyone who played the game found.
Did you have any opportunity to, I guess, your insight and thoughts on seeing Tali's face? Because that was something for a lot of players that meant a lot. This covered, very mysterious, innocent character. Not innocent in some cases, but a character that means so much. What explain to us essentially the process that went into that of the actually seeing the face?
Oh, we went around that so many times.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a point where we were going to show the face in-game, and then we realized we were doing a ton of work. The amount of work, just purely on a technical level, I would have been great showing the face in-game, you know, if she'd gotten the planet or, you know, right before she died or you know, something at a moment of, you know, emotional climax for her character arc. But just the sheer amount of technical work necessary to make a completely new alien face and get the lip sync rigged up would have probably meant cutting a type of enemy creature. And
Really?
The lip sync, especially, you know, each game is built on the shoulders of the last, and you know, so the good news is, you know, in Inquisition we were able to do things, you know, because of what we learned in Mass Effect, and hopefully, in you know, whatever games come next, we'll be able to build on what we learned in Inquisition. But yeah, every time to create a new race that isn't just a human with a different paint job. And to give them appropriate lip sync, it's as much work as animating the entire body of a little guy you're going to fight.
Another fascinating thing that we never would have known. Amazing. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. So that was why we made the decision to do it in the photograph that she gives you, and I think that, you know, I like that the way you saw it in game. I like, because even with that, you never get the full view, and you know, that was kind of what I liked. I like the mystery, and I think that you know, in the game when you see it, you get it. The light glances off it. You get the idea that, oh, she's showing you her face, but you don't get to zoom in on it. And again, it's part of living in the YouTube and Twitch era, is people immediately screen capturing that, blowing it up, you know, getting a good close look at it, and stripping away all the mystery. And you know, just like that, you're looking at it out of context, and you go, it doesn't look alien enough. You know, I wish they'd done something different with it. And you know, in context, she's showing you something that no one else has ever seen, you know, except her own parents. You know, it's a moment of amazing vulnerability, and from an emotional context, I really love that.
Mass Effect and Tali's story, rather, at least how she's involved for what we know as players, is done. That the trilogy is completed and her story went through its final arc. What do you think a character like Tali represents in the world of Mass Effect? And for you personally, what kind of story were you trying to tell? What kind of motivation and inspiration were you drawing on and hoping to be represented in this character?
Well, again, I look at characters as, you know, their goals, the things they're afraid of, and their flaws. And Tali's goal was always, you know, she was the daughter of an admiral who had the dream of getting her people a homeworld. And her biggest fear was always failing her people. You know, disappointing them, not doing the right thing for the fleet, and her flaw, like we talked about, was her blindness. The fact that she was raised in a way that left her with, you know, a lot of latent racism. And what I really, you know, the part of it that I really enjoyed, and whether it's, you know, overly optimistic or not, I enjoyed writing a character who had that flaw and was able to overcome it. You know, like I was saying with you know, knowledge versus ignorance, I have to believe that when confronted with enough truth, most people can overcome their blind spots. And for me, that's fundamentally a story about hope. You know, it's also, if you're the player who didn't reconcile Tali and Legion, then it's a tragic story. And, you know, that's equally valid. But for me, it's a story about someone growing up, you know, overcoming her earlier limitations and just learning to be a better person as a result. And I love that.